Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. A slightly contentious issue in the feminist world at the moment is preferred pronouns. When is it correct to use them? Should you use them at all? Should you use them rarely, but allowing for occasional exceptions? And to discuss this, I'm joined by the family law barrister Sarah Phillimore and the author of The Reckoning, How the Democrats and the Left Betrayed Women and Girls, Kara Dansky. Thank you both for joining me. I want to come to you first, Sarah, because you published an article recently in The Critic magazine about a trans-identified judge, and you'd said that you would use the preferred pronouns of that individual, and you received a bit of flack for that. Could you just talk to us a bit about that article and your reasoning?
Yeah, it was an article I thought with a very important point about a judge who behaved in a way that was contrary to the judicial oath, a judge who made public pronouncements which were discriminatory and frankly a bit bonkers, saying gender identity was a biological characteristic. And more importantly for me, a judge who contacted me personally via LinkedIn, using a profile that led no doubt that they were a serving judge. So I wrote an article about that. I thought it was something that was very important. And I had people, after I'd written it, saying, well, I'm not going to read that because it's full of lies. You've lied about the pronouns. What else are you going to lie about? And then someone saying, well, I couldn't read it because it was just so confusing. Even though I had said in the first or second paragraph, this judge is a man. There is only one way to be female. That's to be born female and live to 18. So I'm afraid I just don't accept that someone couldn't get through 900 words without getting totally confused. And I used preferred pronouns because I wanted people to read the article. My audience was not women who know sex is real and it matters. My audience was all those, particularly lawyers, who stayed out of the debate out of fear or apathy. And I felt if I went in, guns blazing, saying he, I reduced the potential audience of that article. I wasn't lying. It just, the reaction really disturbed me.
Well, Kara Dansky, can I bring you in here? What's wrong with what Sarah's saying? Why wouldn't that be a sensible, strategic thing to do if you want to get people to read the article?
Yeah, thanks for having me. And Sarah, I did read it, I want you to know. So I understand the point that Sarah's making when she says she was very clear up front that the judge was male and that there's only one way to be female. I get what she's saying. I think, though, that at least in the States, the argument that we need to use so-called preferred pronouns to persuade people is misguided. And I think that because WDI did some polling last fall that showed that in the US, 4 out of 5 voters across the political spectrum understand that the statement, a woman is an adult human female, is true. So we don't need to persuade them of that fact. Almost everybody knows that the emperor has no clothes. And so from my view, what needs to happen now is we need to persuade people to say out loud that the emperor has no clothes. And in my view, using opposite sex pronouns undermines that goal.
Kara, can I just ask you on that, though? What about the situation where you have a close friend who is trans-identified? You're talking in private. This is someone you've known for a long time. You're not talking to a gender ideologue or anything like that. And it's just something that would make them feel more welcome. Even in those circumstances, would you say it's wrong to use those pronouns?
So I am at the point that it's not even possible for me to use an opposite sex pronoun. I couldn't do it if I tried. If I were in the presence, calls herself or himself, at a minimum, what I would do is I would be using the person's name when I referred to the person in the third person. But typically, you know, when we're with people, we're not using third person, right? We're interacting and we're using first and second person. So I don't think that situation will arise all that frequently.
Sarah, can I ask you about this? Because some of the reaction that I've seen online from a small handful of feminists who are very, very angry about people, even in exceptional circumstances, using preferred pronouns, is that they've resorted to lies, defamation, just mudslinging, insults. I don't think that's a persuasive tactic. I think a lot of us are open to persuasion, but maybe that isn't the way to go about it. Would you say I'm right about that or wrong?
Well, of course, you're right. This isn't a debate about pronouns. I don't care about pronouns. They're not magic. They don't confer sex on anybody. This is about the apparent inability of what I hope is just quite a vicious and vocal minority to accept any disagreement or deviation from their own way of thinking. If we're going to talk strategy, which I'm not a general with an army, I'm an individual, and I will do always and only what I think is the right thing to do. If you are, however, wanting to talk in wider terms of strategy, you need to tell me what is your goal. And the goal of a lot of these people appears to be to remove trans people entirely from public life, which I don't accept as a goal. But once you've clarified your goal, you tell me if this strategy of insulting, defaming, and threatening people who disagree with you is a good strategy. I think it's a very poor one. It certainly got me riled up.
Yeah, so Cara, can I ask you about that specifically? I mean, I mentioned on this on a tweet very casually that in the past, when I've been speaking to friends or about close friends, I have used their preferred pronouns, and I got called a misogynist, a grifter, an evil, all kinds of things, and some things I can't even mention on this programme. Is that really the way to go about things? I mean, shouldn't we, as Sarah say, be making our own decisions about these things?
So it's clear that I am not doing that, right? Like, I am here to have a genuine, sincere conversation about strategy. And in terms of the goal, so my goal and the goal of Women's Declaration International globally and in the United States is to protect women and girls as a sex class. And so that's the goal that we are advancing. And in my view, if that is the goal, then it is undermined by the use of opposite sex pronouns. But I'm not coming after either of you or calling you names or yelling at you. I don't agree with that as a strategy. And I will also say, with respect to your article, Sarah, you know, it was very obvious to me that even though you and I have a difference of opinion on the use of opposite sex pronouns, I'm very well aware that you wrote the article that you wrote, having come to your own conclusion. And I know that you know all of the issues. And so I don't want to argue with you about your use of opposite sex pronouns in your article. I'm more interested in a general conversation about the strategy, the most effective strategies for protecting women and girls as a sex class, which in my view includes the eradication of gender identity ideology, which is to say nothing about individuals who claim to identify as the opposite sex or no sex at all, or some mysterious third sex that doesn't exist.
So this is an interesting point, Sarah, is I think a lot of these debates are about to what extent does the language that we use influence what happens in real life. I get very agitated by reporters and journalists calling male criminals she when they're clearly men, and I think that's effectively misleading the public, which is why I never do that. But do you think that these decisions that are made about personal pronoun use have real-world implications that go beyond each individual case?
Oh, of course they do. It depends entirely on context. What the BBC did with Scarlett Blake was wrong. That was a lie. That was deliberately obfuscatory, and I completely understand people's anger about that. What they should have said was, this person is a man who adopted a female identity, the name is, and then we'll use so-and-so pronouns. I mean, the BBC dodged it really effectively, talking about Tiffany Scott, just by using the name Scott. So that's one way of doing it. I completely accept things like journalism, police, recording of crimes. There can be no mucking about. You've got to use the right pronoun for the right sex, because otherwise people can be misled. But I'm talking about people like me who were very clear what I was doing, people who are talking to friends, people they love. The example I give, for example, is if I have a distressed teenage client who wants to be called a certain name or pronoun, I am not in that moment going to start lecturing them about gender politics. I will do what I think is right for my client. Now, I don't think Cara and I have any quarrel at all. We want the same thing. The problem is this pronoun, this ridiculous distraction, has opened up a real fear for me that this inability to debate or to allow any disagreement is not something I naively thought was on one side only. And I've just seen so many ugly and ludicrous examples of people who effectively don't understand what freedom of speech is. Yes, I think clarity in language is important, but you know what's more important is allowing people to use the language they choose. Now, that is the hill I'm going to die on. And if victory is only secured in the gender wars by compelling or crushing the freedom of speech of others. I don't want it. It's not my victory, and you're on your own. I won't be supporting anyone who goes down that road. I'm not saying, of course, that Cara is, but I think for those who are very insistent that pronouns are so important, they do need to have an eye on what some people in their camp are doing, because it's hugely disruptive and actively dangerous. And I think most of them are just enjoying the chance to have a pop at someone. But it's got to be confronted. You have to allow people that freedom, that personal choice. I use the pronouns I think appropriate in the circumstances. But of course, I agree, journalists need to be clear. And the reporting on Scarlett Blake was not clear. Many people did not know that Scarlett Blake was a man because of the way that was dealt with.
Finally, Cara, just your final word on that, final thought before we wrap up.
Thanks. Yeah, I just think that the extent that this is a political movement to protect girls as a sex class, and in my view is, I think it's time to move the Overton window, at least in the States. I do my best not to comment on things happening outside our own country. But at this point, it's time to move the Overton window and really encourage people who are just waking up to this, to let them know that it's perfectly fine to call a man a man. And we have had a lot of success in this. We have, for example, persuaded people like Riley Gaines, who started out using opposite sex pronouns. We've persuaded her to stop doing that. We've had a lot of success in the federal legislature, and we've had tremendous success before the federal judiciary by always maintaining adherence to correct sex pronouns. And I just think it's important as a policy matter. It's time. It's time to move the Overton window, and I think we can do it.
Thank you very much. Cara and Sarah, thanks so much for joining me tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And next on Free Speech Nation, Donald Trump waves to some migrants, visitors to a Willy Wonka experience get less than they bargained for, and a man gets confronted by a stranger for ordering a Happy Meal. It's almost time for social sensations. Don't go anywhere.